Brahmadevam Atmabuddhi Prakasham Mumukshurvai Sharanamaham Prapadye. We who seek liberation take refuge in that infinite reality which illumines the hearts of all, which is the source of the Creator Himself, and who gives forth the infinite knowledge, Veda. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning I'm going to speak on what can we expect from a life of Vedanta or a Vedantic life. Not a life in Vedanta, because that would indicate that the emphasis is on being member of an organization. And so it's not about being member of an organization or anything. Though we are an organization, and an organization which most of us respect highly, and to which some of us have dedicated ourselves to. But an organization serves a purpose. And when the organization becomes the purpose, then religion degenerates. When the purpose is just to maintain the organization and to promote the organization, and members are there only in order to facilitate the organization's own life, then the organization itself becomes a problem. So not what we can expect from a life in Vedanta, meaning as members of the Vedanta Society, but what we can expect from a life dedicated to the teachings of Vedanta. Now, we talk about big things. We talk about illumination, we talk about enlightenment, we talk about identity with Brahman, knowing my identity with all of existence, realizing myself as pure consciousness separate from the mind and body. These are all true. There are people in every generation who realize these things, who realize the reality of them. But they're not many. There are not many in any generation who do that. There are few in every generation who do that. Even among those who have renounced the world and dedicated themselves full time to the pursuit, there are only a few who attain to the heights of spiritual life, ultimate realization, enlightenment, etc. And so what can we ordinary people really expect? If Vedanta is meant for enlightenment, realization, the realization of God, realization of our identity with reality itself, and if that is rare, it happens in every generation, but it's rare, then what's the use? What's the use of taking up Vedanta? It's better to get what I can from the world and forget about Vedanta, if the goal of it is rare. And so what can we ordinary people really expect from trying to practice and identify with the teachings of a highly abstract, transcendental philosophy like Vedanta? A person who dedicates himself to something without knowing why is, of course, foolish. If you're going to dedicate your life to something, give all of your energy, give your mind, give your heart to something, and you don't really know why you're doing it, you're either foolish or you do have some sort of idea of what you're dedicating yourself to. So what can we really expect? We ordinary people who don't start out with ideal conditions. When you look at the lives of some of the great saints of the world, including the Vedantic sages, you find that from childhood, many of them had almost ideal conditions. And Sri Krishna says in the Gita that if one doesn't attain to realization in this life, if one falls short on the path in this life, then one will be reborn perhaps in a wealthy family, or one will be reborn, even better, in the family of yogins, where one has from the beginning of their childhood training in yoga and spiritual life. And that, of course, we see that kind of life is rare. That kind of birth is very, very rare. And so people who start out with great advantages spiritually, who take a early interest in spiritual life and just seem to know what they were born for and where they're going, then of course we can see that for them it may be relatively easy. Even they had to go through struggles. Even Sri Ramakrishna had to go through struggles. But what about us? People who were born just in an ordinary family, maybe a good family, maybe not so good, but an ordinary family. What can we expect from Vedanta? We put a lot of emphasis in Vedanta on spiritual experience. We say that that religion is about experience. It's about practice and the attainment through practice of spiritual experience. Now, there's a reason for that, and that's because religion, from the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and the Hindu tradition in general, shows that the purpose of religion is not belonging to a church or a temple. It's not about going to heaven after death because you did all the right things, you followed all the rules, you didn't kill anybody, you didn't rob a bank, and you believed in the teachings, and so you go to heaven. No, that's not the goal of Vedanta. And so we teach that experience is the goal. And yet we also see that the highest experience is rare. Now as I said, there's a reason for that, and that's because religion is about transformation. And if we forget that, then we forget the very purpose of religion. And religion becomes just another social phenomenon. But there's a danger in that emphasis on experience also. And that I've seen, I won't mention the group because it's a very well-known group and a respected group, a Hindu group where members have told me that they sit around talking about their spiritual experiences. As he put it, these are his words, we sit around over a beer and talk about our spiritual experiences. And so what happens when we emphasize that religion means experience is that we begin to think that, well, if I haven't had an experience, then I'm nothing. I want to be something. I don't want to be left out. And so then we begin to imagine experiences. That's what happened in Sri Ramakrishna's life, not with Sri Ramakrishna, but in his last year of life, when he was at Shampur and then at Kashipur, the devotees began to practice samadhi at home, meaning practicing looking like they were in samadhi. And so then they would come to Kashipur and pretend to go into samadhi. And Swami Vivekananda saw that, Narendra at that time saw that, and scolded them and began to take those who would listen aside and say, no, we must practice strict viveka, vairagya, spiritual discernment and renunciation and so forth. Study the scriptures. We must make the mind strong and not become, not base our spiritual life on a pretense, pretending to have spiritual experience. So when we put so much emphasis on experience, that's what spiritual life is about, and when genuine high spiritual experience is rare, then the danger is that we begin to make it up, because nobody wants to be left out. We've given our life to spiritual life, and so now I'm supposed to be having experiences. One of my teachers, a Swami, a great Swami, a very spiritual man, when I knew him, and I still know him, he's still alive, he told me that when he was a young college student, he got initiation from Swami Yatishwarananda, who was one of the great yogis of the order, a great man of illumination. And so a year after his initiation, Swami Yatishwarananda came back to the village where he lived, where his family lived. And so, like other disciples, he went to see him, to see his guru. And so as he's sitting outside of the interview room, waiting for his turn, he's thinking that, well, now I have to have something to tell him about my practice. It's expected that I must have had some experience or something, so I have to come up with something to tell him. And so then he goes into the interview room and he tells Swami Yatishwarananda that, Maharaj, at the time of meditation, I see a light. And so he's thinking in his mind, when I sit for meditation in my room, I can see a light bulb outside of my room. So I'm not telling a lie, but at least I'm telling something. So Maharaj, when I meditate, I see a light. And so Swami Yatishwarananda, who again was a great yogi, he just smiled and said, someday may you see the real light. So again, that's the danger of emphasizing experience, and yet spiritual life is about transformation and about eventual experience. And so, how do we manage this problem? And one other example, in the Zen Buddhism, which all of you have heard about, the Zen Buddhism in Japan and Korea, and same thing called Chan Buddhism in China. There they say that the Zen is the doctrine of immediate experience, experience here and now. Zen came as a reaction to the Buddhism of the day and the early centuries of the Common Era, 500, 600, 700, in that period. Buddhism had become degenerate, and the path had become so elaborated that it was considered that it would take anybody millions of births before they could attain to Buddhahood. And so in this life, all you can hope to do is to maybe improve yourself a little bit so that you get a better birth. But enlightenment was conceived as such a high, infinitely high and remote possibility that nobody even considered that was possible. So Zen came as a reaction, a healthy reaction. No, the purpose of Buddhism, the Buddha's teaching, is to attain enlightenment here and now. So we must practice for that, to attain it here and now. And there were many who attained to illumination through Zen Buddhism over the centuries. But in modern times, that became, again, corrupt, because it's the doctrine of immediate enlightenment here and now. And to be a Zen teacher, you have to have had enlightenment, and very few have had it. And so then you begin to cheat, you begin to pretend. And so in Japan, right now, I don't know how prevalent it is, but in the 20th century, it became a practice that you could buy your certificate of enlightenment. If you paid the money to the teacher, you could get your certificate that, yes, he has attained enlightenment, and then you can go out and teach others enlightenment. So that kind of perversion, that kind of degeneration we find when, as a possibility, when experience is the end-all and be-all of spiritual life. And when many of us, especially those of us from the West, when we come to Vedanta or to Buddhism or any Eastern tradition, but I'll speak in terms of Vedanta, we read about people like Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, other saintly people, Ramana Maharshi, Sai Baba, Shirdi Sai Baba, etc. And we think that, well, spiritual life is very real, it's a wonderful thing, and so after a few months of practice, then maybe I also will attain to that. And so we think that after 6 months or so, then maybe I will have attained to illumination, and then I can get on with other things that I need to do. Then we come and practice and find that, no, this is more than a lifetime's work. So again, what can we expect? In our tradition, we have spent a century criticizing either directly or indirectly traditions like Christianity and Judaism for teaching morality, only morality. Not that we teach morality also, but we teach it as not the end of spiritual life, but just as a preparation. But the purpose is for spiritual experience. But again, if high spiritual experience is rare, then we should be careful in criticizing those who emphasize lower attainments like goodness and morality and so forth. So, one of the most common questions people like myself get from people is, Maharaj, I practice meditation. I've been practicing for quite some time now, and my mind is just a mess. I can't concentrate. I can't meditate. My mind goes everywhere. And so, as I always tell people, that is everyone's problem. That's where we all start. And it takes years and years before we begin to get success. And so it's better to know that from the beginning, so that we don't begin to think that, well, I'll practice a little meditation, a few minutes a day, and after a few weeks, after a few months, maybe after a year at the most, then I will have succeeded. No, meditation is a lifetime search. The same teacher who said about the light bulb, he used to tell me that even if a person of a brilliant intellect like Albert Einstein, who had spiritual tendencies as well, Einstein had spiritual tendencies, not religious, but he was an early spiritual but not religious person. And that if he had turned consciously to spiritual life, his were sort of just natural characteristics that he had, because mind was so much in higher thought of physics that he wasn't so interested in the ordinary world. And so that developed a sort of natural detachment and dispassion and so forth. But this teacher told me that even if someone like Einstein had decided consciously to turn his mind towards spiritual life, he would have had the same problems that we have. That is, with a distracted mind, a mind refusing to concentrate. Why? Such a brilliant man who could focus his mind with such intensity on physics. That's because that's what he loved, and so he could put his mind there. In spiritual life, what we need is the ability to put the mind on something whether it likes it or not, and to keep it there. That's why meditation is difficult. Why it's easy for a musician to lose themselves in their music, an artist to lose themselves in painting, a physicist to lose themselves in their research. But in spiritual life, we have to learn the art of putting the mind on something and keeping it there whether the mind wants to be there or not. It's not just following our natural tendencies. It's going against our natural tendencies. So again, this is the difficulty of emphasizing spiritual experience so much. But obviously, there is a benefit to following a tradition like Vedanta. There is a benefit to it. And it's true that spiritual life is about transformation and about eventual experience of reality, direct realization of reality, that is our goal. And so I want to talk about what the real benefits are that we ordinary people like all of us here, that we can expect to find if we try to lead a spiritual life, if we try to practice the principles of Vedanta. I've seen many times many people, in the lives of many people, ordinary people, very ordinary people, people who had little spiritual advantage in their life, and yet over a lifetime their life was transformed in a very beautiful way. And by the end of their life, some of them had attained to a real state of spiritual advancement, visible spiritual advancement. So first, we need to, when looking at others, because it's always easier to judge others than to judge ourselves. As one of our American monks used to, in Chicago used to tell me, that we judge the actuality of others by our own ideal. We don't judge their ideal by our ideal or their actuality by my actuality, but I take my ideal and judge others that, oh, they're not living up to my ideal. Well, are you living up to your ideal? To your own ideal? No. And so, but the mind is used to looking outside and to judging others. And so let's look at others for a moment. Swami Prabhavananda, who founded the Hollywood Vedanta Society, a very prominent Swami in America in the old days, in the first half or the first first 3/4 of the 20th century. When people would criticize somebody, he would say, "Wait, don't criticize them. You haven't seen the whole story yet. You haven't seen the whole story yet." And that I've seen many times. There's somebody who maybe as a devotee has been on the path, and then they take a turn for the worse, and their life seems to be going in a bad direction. But no, wait. It may be that that's what you see now, but that may be something that they're having to get out of the way, and that eventually their life will turn around again. And I've seen that many times. Someone who seemed to be lost, someone who seemed to be going in the wrong direction, that in time they came back. So Swami Prabhavananda used to say, don't judge until you see the complete story. That is, until you see the whole of the person's life. Swami Ramakrishnanandaji used to say that if I'm starting out here, I'm in the mountains, and I'm starting out here and going to that distant peak. And so I'm walking up the mountain that I'm on, but then after a while I start going down. And people from a distance say, "Oh, he was going to go to that high mountain, and look, he's going downwards now. He's going the wrong way." Well, no, sometimes we have to go down in order to come back up again. So Swami Vivekananda used to say that go down into hell if you need to get strength, but come back with strength. He said, don't be afraid even of hell. If you need to go down into hell, but come back with strength. And so, first of all, we shouldn't judge others by their present state. Just hands off, leave people alone. Let them work out their own destiny. And oftentimes we'll find that a person who seems to have been going up and now they're going down, that in time they'll go back up again. And we'll see that something in them had to be fulfilled, something had to be worked out. Another thing we should remember as background for what I'm going to say about what we can expect is that in judging another person, again, because it's all, as I said, it's always easier to judge others than judge ourselves. We like to do that more than judging ourselves. We should always see a person in terms of what their starting point is. I've known people who started out in a very miserable condition. And after many, many years, after decades of practicing Vedanta, they had come to a very stable and good condition in their life. No, they had not had spiritual experience, but their life was turned around. Now their life was oriented towards something real. And so we should always look, where did a person start? And through practice, where did they come to? And so there are many examples of that. For instance, one that I sometimes use is there's an American Buddhist teacher named Stephen Levine, a very good Buddhist teacher, who back in the 1980s, during the heights of the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco, he was one of the early people who, as a spiritual teacher, he worked with AIDS patients, trying to bring them some sort of succor, spiritual comfort, and so forth, at a time when nobody wanted anything to do with them. Everyone avoided them. So he would go into the hospitals and work with such people. So there was a young man in his mid-20s who was dying of AIDS at a time when AIDS was fatal. The young man was dying of AIDS. And so Stephen Levine had been working with him for some time. And so one day he came again to see him, and the young man was in tears. And Stephen asked him what was the matter. And so he said, "My parents came to see me from somewhere in the Midwest, Kansas, Oklahoma, someplace like that. And his parents were fundamentalist Christian. He said, my parents came to see me, and they told me that I've wasted my life, that I'm going to hell, that I've lived in sin, and that I've wasted my life. Now I've contracted AIDS, and I'm going to die as a young man, and my life is finished. I've wasted it." But then I realized, no, I found my path. And that's enough for one life. And so shortly after that, the young man died. But he died with that comfort, knowing that, no, now I found what life is about. I haven't experienced it yet, but now I know where I'm going. I know what the purpose of life is. I know what the purpose of all of this happiness and sadness and trials and tribulations and successes, all of that, the purpose of all of that, now I know what that is. And so I haven't wasted my life. That much I've accomplished. And he had the faith that he would come back and continue that progress. So again, we have to look at others, and also when we learn the art of looking back on ourselves objectively, to judge by where we started and where others started and where they have come to. So one of the first things that we gain from a life of dedication to Vedanta, to the teachings of Vedanta. Again, of course there's a value to a society like this, that's why we have it, and that's why we work through it and dedicate ourselves to maintaining it. But again, I'm speaking of dedicating ourselves to the teachings of Vedanta, not to just maintaining a church or temple. So one of the first things we gain is what this young man who was dying from AIDS and who died from AIDS gained. We gain a goal-oriented life. We begin to know what life is about. And that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing, to know why I'm alive, what the purpose of all of this is. If there's no purpose to this life, except for just to have fun, well, when you look at the amount of fun that you have, and yes, sometimes we have fun. We all have fun sometimes. Every day, hopefully, we have something, some period that's fun, that's enjoyable. But if that's all that, if the happiness that we have in this life is all that there is to be had, then certainly the trials and tribulations and worries and anxieties and fears outweigh the happiness that we have. So is life worth it? No, it's not really worth it. If this is all that there is. Swami Vivekananda said that if this were all that there were to life, meaning just ordinary social life, then I would rather commit suicide. If this is all that there is, it's not worth living. It's not worth living. No, it's not. Most of us keep living even when we don't have a goal, when we don't know why we're alive, because we somehow hope that we're going to figure it out. But it's only life based on hope that maybe at some point this will all make sense. But again, if this is all that there is, life isn't worth it. And so spiritual life, Vedanta in particular, and again, I'll speak in terms of Vedanta, but this is true of spiritual life in general. But today, speaking of Vedanta, Vedanta shows what the purpose of life is, why I'm alive, what I'm to do, what the purpose of my life is. And if I understand that, then I begin, once I understand it deeply, once I've internalized it, not just read about it and said, oh, that's an interesting idea, but once I've taken that idea and brought it inside myself so it becomes part of my way of thinking, then suddenly I see that no, my happiness, my tears, my successes, my failures, the good things I do, the mistakes I make, the bad things I do, all of that has a purpose. It's all for something high and noble. And so suddenly life makes sense in a way it can't make without that. Again, if we're just going to die and that's the end, well, if things are difficult, why not just get it over with now? Why not just pull the plug, get it over with now? If it's going to end someday and that is the end of it, oh no, why not just get it over with now? Might as well finish with it now. No, because there is a purpose to life. There is a purpose to life, and a high purpose and an eternal purpose. That we are going towards something which is the solution to all problems, to all contradictions in life, all insufficiencies of life. Now, in some religions, they emphasize going to heaven, where everybody will be happy and everybody will be, there won't be death, there won't be sickness, there won't be stomach aches, there won't be headaches, you won't get cancer, you won't grow old, you just keep on living a happy life. That's not what Vedanta teaches. Vedanta does say that yes, there are heavenly worlds. There are heavenly worlds, but they're only temporary. only temporary, then you have to come back here. And so some religions preach a heavenly life of enjoyment where everybody is happy and everybody feels good about themselves and about everybody and everybody loves everybody. Why? Because they're trying to point to something for ordinary people, that there is something that in the future that will make up for all the insufficiencies of this life. All of the insufficiencies of this life. Now, Vedanta, again, doesn't teach that there's a heavenly world where you go and you eat and drink and make merry and you never die and everybody loves everybody and everybody's having a good time. Basically, this world without all of the negatives, no. In that way, there's no resolution of the difficulties of life that way. The resolution of the difficulties of life is to realize the truth which is behind all of this, and which is beyond all contradiction, beyond all the contradictions in life, and all of the polarities of life. And so that there is a state that we are aiming towards, that is the birthright of everyone, that is the final resolution of all of the difficulties of life. In the experience of infinite, timeless, eternal bliss, knowledge, wisdom, a state of completion, and a state of infinite fulfillment, a state of infinite wonder. And so, again, if we have an orientation in life, a goal towards which we're moving, which is the solution to all of the insufficiencies of life, then that itself is a great thing. So that's one of the things that we get when our understanding of life, our understanding of existence is based on the highest truth, which makes sense of all of life, all of the difficulties, all of the trials and tribulations, then we've gained something wonderful once we have that understanding. And the more that idea goes deep inside of us, the less we look outside for fulfillment. Yes, we still need to eat. We socialize with people. We enjoy people's company. We enjoy good food, things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. The Vedanta doesn't pour cold water on all of the normal experiences of life. But if we know that behind all of that, there's something which is infinitely fulfilling, and it's towards that I'm going, and it's towards that my experiences are leading me, then I realize that I don't have to squeeze everything out of the experiences of outer life, of sense life, because that's not what it's all about. Yes, I get good food. I enjoy good food. I know what good food is. I know what bad food is. Yeah, that's still there. Sri Ramakrishna knew that. When he would go to Kamarpur and the ladies of the house would say, well, we don't have such and such a spice for the curry, so we'll just make it without it. Sri Ramakrishna would say, what? I came all the way from Calcutta leaving the dishes, the fine dishes in Dakshineshwar, and you're not going to make the curry in the proper way? No, make it in the proper way. And so that was Sri Ramakrishna. So again, that is there. But we begin to know, as Sri Ramakrishna knew, that no, that's not where real fulfillment is. We know that what joy I can get from ordinary life, what I could ever get, I still get. But I know that that's always going to be very little. Very little. And so that's not where I look for ultimate fulfillment. So the mind begins to search for deeper fulfillment. And the ordinary fulfillments of life, yes, let them come, let them go. If I pass through a period of difficulty, well, that also will pass. That also will pass. So that's okay. I'm here for the long haul because I'm going towards a goal which is infinite. So that's one of the great benefits we get. Another thing is that we begin, once we internalize the ideas of Vedanta and realize that everything here is a manifestation of the infinite reality. Everything here is a manifestation of God. At the heart of everything here is that divine luminous being that we know as God, that we know as our chosen ideal if we have a chosen ideal, whatever that chosen ideal may be, because all chosen ideals are one. They have different faces, but they're all the same reality. Once I know that everything here is a manifestation of that divine reality, then I begin to change my relationship to the world around me. And again, I'm talking about things that are possible for every one of us here. Every one of us here. I begin to get a respect for others. I begin to get a respect for things. I no longer take something and throw it down out of my own frustration. I realize that no, everything here is a manifestation of God. So let me treat everything with respect. Let me treat everything with dignity. If we respect the world and treat the world with dignity, then the world will reciprocate and recognize our dignity as well, that we can find in our own life. Again, these are experiences that are within the immediate reach of all of us. So we begin to develop a respect for everything, which is a wonderful antidote to the cynicism which is so common today. The whole modern world has become cynical about everything, but this is a wonderful antidote to that cynicism and the sarcasm, which are so prevalent in the world today. So respect for everything, including respect for ourselves, because we also are manifestations of that divine being. And so along with that, along with inward respect for our own integrity and our own divine being, we begin to develop a bright self-image. That also is within the possibility of everyone. Why do we oftentimes in our tradition, not all gurus in our tradition teach that, but many of our gurus teach to meditate within the heart. Why meditate in the heart? Why take a divine image like Sri Ramakrishna or Kali or Jesus and meditate on it within the heart? Because this is the center of self-identity. This is where I feel that the core of my vital being is. My sense of identity is here. So as I've sometimes said, if I cook something and give it to people, and people say, "Oh, this is wonderful. Who made this?" Then I say, "Oh, I did it." I don't say I did it, or I did it, or I did it. No, I say I did it, because our sense of the center of my being is here. And so when I meditate on a divine image within the heart, that changes the sense of my very identity. I'm replacing that dark image of myself with the image of divine light, and placing it here in the core of my being. And so I begin slowly to develop a bright self-image. Another thing that I begin to get as I practice the principles of Vedanta, and again, as an ordinary person, is that I begin to develop slowly over the years, I begin to develop a sense of surrender to God. And people joke in our order, the Swamis of our order joke in India. I say they could joke about it here also, but here there's so few monks. In India there are lots of monks, and so more opportunity for monks to joke among themselves. They joke about Thakura Richa. That's Thakur's will. So people say that everybody says Thakura Richa, it's Thakur's will, when they don't get their way. So first you try to get your own way, and when you completely fail, then Thakura Richa. So I tried my hardest to make my will dominant, and that didn't work. So then it's time to surrender. But no, in time we do come to a sense of genuine surrender, where we do begin to see that no, everything happens by the will of God. It doesn't happen according to my will. The more experience I have of trying to assert myself and seeing that no, that doesn't work, that I have to wait on the will of God, then the more I become surrendered to the will of God. And that also is a wonderful thing. Learning how to wait on the will of God, knowing that that God will bring that which I really need when I need it. It may not be what I think I need and when I think I need it, but eventually realizing that no, that which I really need, that which is really good for me, that will come at the proper time. And so I need not be anxious over it. Let things happen. Let things happen. Let me not worry about things. Let me give up anxiety and realize that, yes, that God will bring the things that I need when I need them. And so to give up that insistence that everything has to happen the way that I want it to happen. No. And that's a wonderful thing when that begins to happen, when we begin to see that I can relax in the right way, not relax in the wrong way, or relaxing into procrastination and not caring about, who gives a damn about this or that or the other thing. No, not that way. But no, let me relax into the will of God, and let the will of God bring things about. We begin to have a faith that the universe will bring things about in a way that is appropriate. That we begin to have a faith that there is a wisdom working in the universe, which is God's will, which is bringing things to fruition in the way that is best. And so we're not ultimately responsible for making things happen. There's a general difference in the sense of time between India and here, and not just in the sense that people from India often don't pay attention to time and come to things late. The stereotype of the stereotypical Indian behavior. I don't mean that, but I mean that in India you have a different sense about the way time flows from the way that people have here. And so it took me a long time to understand that. Because nobody talks about it and nobody says anything about it. But why is it that so many people going to India feel that there's something different in the air, something in the mental atmosphere? And what I realized finally is that because of thousands of years of spiritual culture, most people in India are not spiritual. We all know that. It's not that, yes, India is a spiritual culture, but most people are just ordinary people. But because of thousands of years of the striving of countless people for spiritual life, and because that was the heart of the civilization, that was the purpose of the civilization, there is a different sense of time there. And so once I understood that, I was able to cultivate that. And that difference is, as I came to understand it, is that there's a sense that the time is a flow which takes care of things. All you have to do is just to go with the flow of time, and things will happen. You see it even in something that's amazing to Westerners when they first go to India. You don't see it so much now because you're getting bigger roads and better roads in India, and cars drive faster, and now there are even traffic lights, and people even stop at the traffic lights. But back in the 70s and 80s, when I was in India, it was amazing to watch how a car would come up to a village, and the car would be going at a pretty good clip, 30, 35 miles an hour. And there'd be the crowd of people and dogs and cows and filling this little road entering into the village. And the car would speed up to this crowd of people, and the crowd would just sort of people have their backs to the car, many of them, and yet somehow the crowd just sort of opens up and the car just keeps going. And it was amazing to watch the way that things would happen, or the way that a car and a truck on a one-lane road, not two-way traffic, but one-lane road with wide shoulders, they'd come up to each other full speed, and at the last minute they'd go like that. But just the way that time flows there. Whereas in the West, the sense of time is that I'm responsible for making things happen. And so time is a path that I have to walk down, and I have to do things, otherwise nothing gets done. I have to walk down the path and do things and make things happen, otherwise nothing happens. Whereas in India, the sense of time, just the overriding sense of time, people aren't even aware of it, is that time is just a flow, and you're in the river, and the river is carrying you forward. All you have to do is when you come to a rock, just sort of push yourself out of the way of the rock. When you come to branches, you push yourself out of the way of branches, and the flow itself takes care of things. And instead of having to walk down the path and make things happen. And so as you get a sense of surrender to God, that sense of time also comes. And it becomes conscious. So a new sense of time and space that we develop. Time itself becomes a flow, and it no longer becomes a burden. We feel like we're flowing towards something grand. And I just, that will come in the fullness of time. Let me just stay in the flow of time, and it's taking me towards it. My practice is to, my practice becomes to remain in that flow and going forward with it, participating with it. And if I can swim with it faster, then that's good. That's what yoga is all about, is swimming with the current faster so that I can get there sooner, but without a sense of desperation about it. So it's time no longer becomes a heavy burden. It becomes, there's a spaciousness about time. And about space also, as I practice the principles, I think that God is inside of me. God is not way out there. And I'm praying to some distance God above the clouds. But no, God is right here. God is right here. All religions teach that, but the majority of people don't really believe it and don't really act as if that's true. So if I believe that God is here, then my relationship to space also becomes different. We all hear people talk about how if you study astronomy, something like astronomy, astrophysics and such, you begin to get a true perspective on our place in the universe, that I'm this tiny little speck of insignificant dust on this tiny little planet, on an insignificant solar system, in one of countless galaxies in the universe. And so my concerns are as nothing. Well, yes, that's true. My concerns should be as nothing, but not because I'm an insignificant speck of dust lost in some vast universe. No, I begin to feel that the center of the universe is right here, because this is where God is. God is everywhere, but in my experience, we come to feel God is right here. And so the center of the universe is right here. And because I am related to the infinite, the Lord of the universe, the Mother of the universe. And so our sense of space becomes quite different. It's not the usual experience that we have, that the center of gravity, reality, is somewhere out there, and I am insignificant, and I'm sort of circling like a satellite around some center of gravity out there. No, the center of gravity is right here. I don't have to circle around anything. It's right here within me. God is right here within me. And so my relationship to space becomes different. My relationship to the virtues, which humanity has always admired, that becomes different also. The Shankaracharya says in his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita that the long list of 20-something virtues that Sri Krishna lists in the 12th chapter of the Gita, the virtues of a true devotee, Shankaracharya says that these are the virtues which are spontaneously manifested in the lives of the realized souls. But for the rest of us, he says, these are practices. These are practices. And so we begin to realize that, no, these virtues are not something I have to get, not something I have to impose. Morality is not something that's always telling me, no, don't do this, don't do that. You're a bad person if you do this, you're a bad person if you do that. No, the morality has nothing really to do with that. Morality means manifesting the virtues which are already inside of me, but which I haven't allowed to manifest because of the restlessness and vagaries of the mind. And so I begin to see that no, virtues are natural. Virtues are not something that have to be imposed through painful sacrifice, so and so forth. No, that virtues are connected to beauty itself. Virtues are connected to truth. Virtues are connected to joy. And so with that change in our view of morality, The morality is not following a list of rules that we don't really want to follow, but we have to because some God somewhere said that we were supposed to. No, the morality becomes harmony with the nature of the truth itself. Then it becomes natural to follow that which is virtuous. And yes, because of old habits and so forth, we do things that we shouldn't do. We behave in ways that we know we shouldn't. But then we realize that, no, that's because of the vagaries of the mind. Let me keep coming back, because this is my natural state. This is my natural state. It's my natural state to be good, to be holy, to be pure. So let me keep coming back to that. And then we begin to develop, and again, this is something possible for all of us. We begin to develop an inner sense of dignity, an inner sense of dignity, an inner sense of self-control. We find that any lack of self-control brings with it a sense of the loss of dignity. And so we begin to practice self-control, not to go into excess with different things, because by maintaining a sense of self-control and a sense of inner dignity, then I maintain an inner sense of balance and an inner sense of harmony and peace. So along with that inner sense of self-dignity comes a sense of inner power and fearlessness. I don't have anything to fear in the universe. There's nothing for me to fear. What should I be afraid of? I'm not afraid of death itself. I'm not afraid of death itself. Let me face whatever comes. And there comes also the sense that within me is the power to face any problem that life might throw at me. Not that I invite problems, not that I want problems, but life does bring problems. And so the sense that, no, I am up to the challenge of life. We spend so much of our lives thinking that the next wave is going to drown me. The next problem that comes is going to be too much, that life is just too much. I can't bear it. There are too many problems, too many things coming at me. But we begin to get the feeling that, no, I am equal to the task of life. I'm equal to the challenge of life. Another thing that begins to happen as we practiced for years, we begin to get a sense of inner quiet. Inner quiet. Everyone says, oh Maharaj, the mind is so restless, it's going in so many places, I want to tell the mind just to shut up, but the mind won't be quiet. It just goes on round and round and round restlessly. How do I stop the mind? Well, with time we begin to find that, no, the mind does become quieter. It does begin to become quiet. We have a mental quiet. At first in little bits, now and then the mind is quiet. But as time goes on, those moments of quietness of mind begin to expand. And with that, we begin to find that I have time. When something happens in the outer world, somebody says something, somebody does something, that I have time to choose my reaction. I don't have to immediately react. Normally, something happens, somebody pushes our button, and immediately we react. But with time, we begin to see, no, I don't need to do that. There's a moment before the reaction comes where I can decide whether to react or not, or how to react. And so that comes. Along with practice, also a sense of inner joy begins to develop. We begin to feel that joy is coming from the inside. That takes a long time, yes, but it comes. It comes. Most people spend their lives feeling that they're sitting on top of a garbage can, a trash can with a lid, and inside the garbage can is this angry monster that's going to get out. And so we've got to sit on top of the garbage can lid and keep it closed. We've got to be careful to keep the garbage can closed because this monster is going to come out and ruin everything. And so that, of course, is the unconscious mind, the sense from the unconscious mind that there's this demon inside the unconscious mind that's going to get out and ruin everything for me. So I've got to keep this demon stuffed down inside the garbage can of the unconscious. But with time, we begin to feel that no, there's no monster there. The monster died long ago. And so we can even get off of the garbage can, open the lid, and nothing comes out. There's nothing to fear. And so that sense of inner joy, that sense of inner security, and that sense of inner dignity comes. Another thing that comes is we begin to get a fearlessness of death. Death holds no fear for us. One of our devotees in Chicago, an American man, a very good devotee, he used to say, and it's true what he said, is that I'm not afraid of dying. I'm not afraid of death at all. It's just all the pain involved. So yes, that's true. Nobody wants to be lying in pain and stretched out on a hospital bed with tubes in every orifice, and doctors prodding and poking, and aches and pains everywhere. No, nobody wants that. But the fear of death goes, the fear of death. That yes, death is going to come, let it come. Let life come. I'm ready to live as long as I need to live. I'm ready to die whenever that comes. So that also comes, that the understanding of death and the fearlessness in the face of death. And finally, I've seen many times with ordinary devotees, very ordinary devotees who had no spiritual advantages in their life. They're just ordinary people who took up the ideas and tried to practice them the best that they could in their own simple way. But by the end of their life, then they had a beautiful death. They had a beautiful death. They died with a smile on their lips. They died with an experience, a spiritual experience at the time of death. Maybe they had not had a spiritual experience during life. They had experienced some of the benefits that I've talked about, but some of them had not had anything more than that as far as a actual spiritual experience. But many people who at the end of life have had a spiritual experience. And again, very ordinary people who had had a very worldly past before they came to spiritual life. It doesn't matter. Sri Ramakrishna says in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna that Sri Ramakrishna is saying, I say that everyone can realize the self if they pray sincerely. And then Master Mahashoy Sri Ma says, yes, sir, you teach that that if one leads the right kind of life and if one develops spiritually, that one can experience God. If one is in the right state. And Sri Ramakrishna says, no, I say that everyone without exception can realize the self in this life through sincere prayer. And so everyone, whatever the past of our life was like, it doesn't matter. Give that up. Let that go. Don't worry that, I did this and I did that. Why did I do this? Why did I live like that? Why did I waste my life? No. You're wasting it a second time by thinking those thoughts. Give up those thoughts and just think that by connecting myself to the divine, I can have the vision of God. I can have the vision of the self, the divine self. Everybody, Sri Ramakrishna, and he emphasizes, no, I'm not talking about just those who are virtuous, those who are spiritual. Everybody can have the vision of the self through sincere prayer, no matter what they've been and who they are. And so these are some of the benefits of spiritual life to those of us who are just ordinary people, those of us who are not born with great advantages, who are not born in the family of yogins, who are not didn't come to a great teacher when we were in our youth and had such a teacher guide us every step of the way. That all of us can attain to these things. A sense of inner dignity, a sense of inner joy, an orientation of life so that I know where I'm going in life and what life is all about, so that my experiences along the way have meaning. The good experiences, the bad experiences, the successes, the failures, the happiness, the sadness, all of that takes on meaning because I'm going towards something, and these are just signposts along the way. This is part of the working out process. So these, again, and this sense of inner dignity, this sense of orientation towards virtue. Yes, I may still make mistakes. I may still do things that I wish I didn't do. I may still have weaknesses and things. Well, that's okay. But I'm oriented towards virtue, and I know that that is where truth lies. Not because somebody says, I don't want you to do this, even though this is a lot of fun. I don't want you to do it because I don't like it. No, not that. No, virtue is something which is the natural expression of our inner being. And so let me just come to that in a natural way. Let me come to that. As the mind becomes clear, as the mind becomes calm, then these things become easy to practice. It's not something I have to wrench myself away from. No. So with that, I'll stop and let me see if there's one or two questions, if there are. Yes, Ajay here in the aisle here.
Gita chapter 6, something like that, Way to Meditation. I was reading yesterday. It's about attachment and detachment. Good Lord said that you have relatives, friends, they expect something from you. The expectations. Then he said, these leads to attachment. But at the same time, you are your worst enemy, you're your best friend.
Yes.
How do you reconcile that?
Yes. So it's Sri Krishna says that you are your own best friend and you are your own worst enemy. That's because it's our mind is our best friend and our mind is our worst enemy. The mind, when it has come under control, then it's our best friend. The mind guides us properly. When the mind is restless and uncontrolled, then the mind leads us astray. And so the mind itself, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the mind itself becomes our guru. When the mind becomes calm, becomes settled, becomes clear, then the mind itself becomes our guru. The mind itself tells us what we should and shouldn't do. But when the mind is restless, then the restless mind is a confused mind, and so then that mind becomes our enemy. It leads us astray. So, and then as far as our duties and things that we have to do for others. You mentioned that family and friends and so forth, they have expectations of us and all of that. Yes, part of spiritual life is understanding what are my real duties and what are the things that I just want to make a duty because I want to feel responsible or something. No. In spiritual life, those things that are my real duties, those people that depend on me, that I need to support, that I need to help, that we're part of a net of human relations and connections, then yes, I have duties to people. I have duties to family, to friends, to society. But let me know what is a real duty and what is just an assumed duty. Just to give an example, there are people that I have real responsibilities to, children, husband or wife, parents, etc., that I have real responsibilities to. But those same people that I have real responsibilities to, that they depend on me for support and everything, they may try to impose things on me that are not my duties. And so that I have to know. I have to know just because I have a duty to somebody doesn't mean that they can tell me everything that I have to do and make me do things that I know I shouldn't do just because they want me to do it. No, I have to know what is my duty and what is not my duty. And so those things that are real duties, if I give those up, then I'm a lesser person for giving them up. That's part of my spiritual life, is to live up to those responsibilities. But the things that maybe sometimes the same people try to impose on me, and I realize, no, that's not my duty. That's not part of the deal. That's not part of the package. And so, no, that's not what I'm going to do. So, in spiritual life, we have to practice discernment, what we often call discrimination. Now, in modern America, if you talk about discrimination, people say that, well, I thought you're not supposed to discriminate. Meaning racial and ethnic discrimination. So, of course, when we say discrimination in Vedanta, we mean discernment. That we have to discern what I should do and what I should not do. So that's a great art to learn. What are my real duties and what are things that people are imposing on me that really are not duties? So, okay, so we'll stop here. Oh, there is one more question? Okay, one more.
My dad was a physicist, and he he knew Einstein and Fermi. And he told me a story that you mentioned Einstein earlier. They used to argue all the time about fundamental physics. And Einstein always used to make a comment that, oh, God couldn't be thinking this. This couldn't be possibly God's idea. And so Fermi used to tell Einstein, stop telling God what he should be thinking. So my question about that was that all these people that have a spiritual inclination, clearly they think there is a lot more left to explore. So could you make a little comment about that?
Yes, yes. Einstein said, as Newton had said also, in fact, Einstein referred to Newton's statement that both of them felt that they were like playing with shells on the shore of the infinite ocean of knowledge. That what the great discoveries that they made, fundamental discoveries that they made, that those were just small little things on the infinite ocean of knowledge which hasn't yet been discovered. And so a real wise person, a person who is really wise, understands the vastness of knowledge. And so Einstein knew that, Newton knew that. Only great minds understand how much they don't know. And that has a relationship to spiritual knowledge, in that a spiritual person realizes that there are no limits to knowledge and wisdom, and they don't set any limits to it also. They know that they stand in wonder at the ocean of knowledge. A strange thing about understanding, about knowledge, is that when we understand something, then we put it in a box and say, okay, I've already known that. And then it becomes part of dead material, just stuff that, oh, I've already known that, is no longer stimulates the mind. But the mind of a spiritual person becomes a mind of wonder, because it looks at wonder at everything and knows that understanding something is not putting something in a box. It's just understanding a little thread or a little wave in an ocean of wisdom. And so people like Einstein were aware of that. Now, Einstein used to say, this is the first I've heard of that. That's very interesting to hear about him saying to Fermi that, oh, God wouldn't do this or God wouldn't do that. Because Einstein is known for saying that God doesn't play dice with the world. He didn't like Heisenberg's principle or quantum mechanics, because he said that the uncertainty principle, that's not the way God works. But then again, can we put a limit on how God works? Can we say that God doesn't work this way and does work that way? And so the spiritual person becomes a person of wonder, like a child, with a mind like a child's, where everything elicits wonder. There was a Swami, the same Swami that I've mentioned twice during the talk today. I was his assistant at Mayavati in the Himalayas. And so in the warehouse that we had for the editorial department, there were a lot of things stored. And one of my predecessor, who was the assistant to the editor, he had stored a lot of empty matchboxes and just had a pile of empty he was one of those people who was a hoarder, and so he saved everything. So the pile of empty matchboxes. So when this Swami came as the new editor, I took him back to show him what was in the warehouse, and he saw the matchboxes, and he picked one up, one of the small matchboxes. And he slid the drawer open and closed, and he said, I've always been fascinated by matchboxes. Such a simple device, and yet so useful. See how the drawer just slides, and yet how useful it is. So that is the relationship to knowledge that a spiritual person gets, that everything elicits wonder. Whereas in the ordinary mind, everything that we know, I know that. Yeah, I know that. Oh, yeah, I know that. It just becomes dead data, dead information. But for a spiritual person, no, knowledge is sacred. So we'll stop here. And let me give a closing chant, and then I'll give announcements. Om madhuvatarithayate madhuksharanti sindhavaha madhvirnasantoshadhihi madhunaktamutoshasi madhumatparthivagum rajaha madhudyorastu nafpita madhumando vanaspatir madhumagum astu suryaha madhvirgavo bhavantunaha. Om Madhu, Om Madhu, Om Madhu. For us who seek the truth, and for all living beings, may the winds blow sweetly. May the rivers flow sweetly. May the herbs yield us sweetness. Sweet be the night and the break of day. Sweet be the very dust of the earth. May the heavens pour down sweetness upon us. May the trees, lords of the forest, bear us sweetness. May the sun shed its sweetness upon us. May all the directions pour forth sweetness. Om, sweetness, sweetness, sweetness. So for announcements, on Tuesday we'll have the Gita class.